All right, so today we are in Peace in a World Not His, Part 7. All right, Peace in a World Not His, Part 7. I hope you're enjoying this teaching, and not just enjoying it, but more importantly, I'm hoping that it is actually making a difference in you. The whole point of our teachings are to give you stuff, material, information from Scripture that if you were to apply it, would help you become more Yeshua-like, would help you walk that much further along the path towards the kingdom. Okay? And that's what we're trying to do here. Now, of course, we're going through some troubling times, so studying and understanding how peace should look like and what it should look like in a world that's not His. And right now we are hopefully understanding that this is not His world, even though He brought it into existence and He is still sovereign over all things. He's allowed it to be ruled in a different way. Now, Yeshua told us in John 14, verse 27, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give it to you as the world gives. Do not let your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." And so we see that He doesn't give us in the way the world would give you, which is to hand something off to you, to actually give it to you, provide it to you, and you don't have to do anything. We just give it to you. He's going to show us the path to it. He's going to show us what we need to do to have it and receive it. So now we're going to focus on the idea of being afraid and how that relates to having our peace or not having peace. So we're going to go to Exodus 14, Shemot 14. Exodus 14, you should all be very familiar where we're going here as they're leaving Egypt. And we're going to begin in verse 1. And I'm going to read you the verses that we're going to cover before I break them down. So I'm not going to stop in between, as I do in the past. But this time I want to read the first things, and then we'll break it down. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, this is verse 1, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pi Hacheroth, between Migdal and the sea, opposite Baal Zephon, camp before it by the sea. For Pharaoh shall say to the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land. The wilderness has closed them in. And I shall harden the heart of Pharaoh, and he shall pursue them. But I am to be esteemed through Pharaoh and over all his army, and the Mitzrites shall know that I am Yahweh." And they did so. And it was reported to the sovereign of Mitzrayim that the people had fled. And the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, "Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So he made his chariot ready and took his people with him. And he took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Mitzrayim with officers over all of them. And Yahweh hardened the heart of Pharaoh, sovereign of Mitzrayim, and he pursued the children of Israel. But the children of Israel went out defiantly. And the Mitzrites pursued them and all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them camping by the sea beside Pi Hacheroth, before Baal Zephon. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes and saw the Mitzrites coming up after them. And they were greatly afraid. So the children of Israel cried out to Yahweh. And they said to Moshe, "Did you take us away to die in the wilderness, because there are no graves in Mitzrayim? What is this you have done to us to bring us up out of Mitzrayim? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Mitzrayim, saying, 'Leave us alone and let us serve the Mitzrites'? For it would have been better for us to serve the Mitzrites than to die in the wilderness." And Moshe said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the deliverance of Yahweh, which he does for you today. For the Mitzrites whom you see today, you are never, never to see again. Yahweh does fight for you, and you keep still." And Yahweh said to Moshe, "Why do you cry to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them go forward." All right. So part of what I'm going to do today, as I break this down, is I want you to see how you can do this as well. So you read something, kind of follow along to where it kind of gets to a concluded point enough where you can pause. Because then after this, you're going to see instructions that he's going to lift up his rod and stretch out. He's going to tell him what to do next. So the thought is kind of complete here. And then go back and try to look at each verse and say, okay, what's really going on here? So we see beginning in verse 3, Pharaoh, and I'm going to say that that's a metaphor for the world. Mitzrites, Mitzrayim, the land of Egypt, which they're saying, well, you should have left us alone. We would have liked to be better over there, is the world. This is a metaphor for the world, the below, the world that's not his. Remember, they're journeying out of the world that's not his into the world that is his. This is in the physical. We're talking about eventually doing that in the spiritual. So he says that Pharaoh, the world, was aware of the Israelites' movements. So that's the first thing that I got out of this, is that it says here, Pharaoh shall say to the children of Israel, say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, the wilderness has closed them in. So he was aware of their movements. So guess what? Stop being afraid that Pharaoh, Big Brother, and everybody else is aware of your movements. We got a lot of paranoid people out there that are just, trying to do the impossible, which is to think that you can hide. Go ahead and get off the grid as much as you want. Pharaoh was aware of their movements. And by the way, Yahweh, for the Exodus, remember, we've got to look at this from, here comes some eschatology. Okay. We got to look at this from the point of view that we're told, like it was in the first Exodus, it will be in the second Exodus, but it'll be a greater Exodus. So great that they won't even remember the first one when they talk about the second one. So if we're going to look at these as types and shadows, Israel eventually was gathered together in one place, to a certain whatever degree that was, and then they left. And Pharaoh was aware of their movement. So all of you who think that somehow you're going to hide from all of this, it doesn't match Scripture very well. Now, Scripture does say that there will be protection, as it was in Egypt when Goshen had protection over it. Of course, the protection didn't really start to be an issue for the first couple of plagues. Didn't start until like plague 4. So the first 3, there wasn't any protection there. So let's understand as you're looking at this. So first of all, Pharaoh, the world, is aware of your movements and also your struggles. And we're going to see Pharaoh's going to pursue them because he's thinking, I can take advantage of their struggles and I can use those struggles to kill them or re-enslave them or some other thing. Verse 8, we see that as this is going on, Israel went out defiantly. We'll show you, Pharaoh. Our God just decimated your country. Defiantly. Where did all that go 5 verses later? Didn't take long for that strutty, cocky, self-assured thing to just, turn into, we told you back then we didn't want to do this. You have to be careful. There's a lot of comparisons in this area to the parable we covered last time of the sower and the different types of ground. This is like those people that they get all excited, but there's no roots. And so guess what happens? The first sense of problem, right? So then we get to verse 10 through 12, and we see the reaction of the flesh. Okay, the reaction of the flesh. So give me a second. I want to just pull it up in my verses here. I want to read that to you. So the reaction of the flesh is very much like in Matthew 13. So Matthew 13, verse 20 and 21 says, and that sown in the rocky places, this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, but has no root in himself, but is short-lived. And when pressure, persecution, the world, Pharaoh, they're coming, arises because of the word, immediately stumbles. So this arose because of the word was Yahweh told them to leave. Pharaoh didn't like that. And so immediately he stumbles. You see what's happening here? So it matches very well as a flow from what we were just talking about with the parable of the sower. So the flesh reaction comes in verse 10 through 12 and back in chapter 14 of Exodus. So Pharaoh drew near, the people saw, they became greatly afraid. I'm sure that's an understatement. They were about as afraid as you could ever get. I mean, they were in full-out panic, okay? And so just realize that we're not just saying, well, they were scared. I mean, they knew they were going to die. That's the way they felt at the time. And so what do? They cry out to Yahweh, verse 10, right? And then they go to Moses. So now they want to blame Moses. Did you just bring us out here to die? So you have a fear response to the reaction of the world, to your leaving it. Did anybody get a response from the world that you were leaving that was not all that exciting and friendly and had you, some of you, maybe not too many of you hopefully, but some of you may have had that thought, maybe this is not worth doing. Maybe they're right, maybe I need to go back. Maybe you had a spouse that says, see, why'd you do this? Look, everybody hates us now, and all our friends are mocking us, and everybody's praying for us, thinking that we're unsaved and all this other stuff because we left the church and we stopped doing Christmas and we stopped eating pork and all this other things. So the fear response, step one, this is the reaction of the flesh. Step one, I'm going to give you 3 steps of the reaction of the flesh. Step one, you have the fear response of the world to your leaving it. Okay, so we're being afraid of the world because they're threatening you because you're leaving it. So then we see the next thing in verse 11, right? Did you do this? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so finger pointing. They want to blame Moses now. Deferring the responsibility for your choice. Moses didn't go and at sword point and make people leave Egypt. He didn't go from house to house and threaten them, pack your stuff and let's go already. They ran out of there happy to leave. Defiantly in verse 8. You can just see them in a sort of, these are slaves, and all of a sudden they're all strutty and haughty, and we're leaving and in your face. After all, remember, they just took all the gold and the silver, they did all these other things, and they're just leaving. And it looks like initially nobody's coming against them, nobody's following them or anything, okay? Now, clearly there were spies spying them out, otherwise Pharaoh wouldn't have known. So there were some people that said, I'm just going to keep an eye on this group where they're going. So fear reaction, then we have finger pointing, or deferring responsibility. And then we have step 3 in verse 13. He says, verse 12. He says, don't you remember when we told you, leave us alone and let us serve? This is the spin doctoring that they're doing here. They're like rational lying to themselves. When did they say, leave us alone? We love it here. Now, they got a little upset when they were told to make the bricks without the straw. Hey, Moses, you're not helping. Thanks, but no thanks, I guess, at that point. But when did they say, look, we really don't want to leave. We like it better here to serve the Mitzrites. Didn't we tell you that? Didn't we say, leave us alone, let us serve? See, they're spinning the whole thing. And they're rational lying to themselves. Because instead of reacting in the spirit, meaning with the intrinsic nature of Yah, okay, that would be when I want to make sure I'm defining this for people that don't know my definitions, the way I understand things. Go listen to the teaching, understanding the Ruach, understanding the Spirit. But if you're reacting in the flesh nature, you're going to do these things. It's a fear response. If you're going to react in the Yahweh nature, the Spirit nature, it's His intrinsic nature. So you see this play out with Joshua and Caleb. Okay, they have the right intrinsic nature, and they respond to the spying out the land the way that the other 10 don't. The other 10 have what? A fear reaction. They want to blame. It's the same conversation as here. Did you bring us out here to kill us? Why did we even leave? Blah, 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 blah. And somewhere along the way, somebody thinks that leeks are great. Okay? Somebody had a good recipe or something. I don't know. The leeks. Okay. So we have the 2 different types of reaction. Look, in a world that's not His, for you to have peace, you have to have a spiritual reaction. In other words, His intrinsic nature type reaction, not a world or flesh reaction. In this world that's not His, you're to be in, but not of. Of means you behave like them and you be a part of it. But you're supposed to be separate, set apart. And so you need to react in His intrinsic nature. This is how you have Him in you, and you allow that to exude itself and exemplify itself and be in your behavior. So here's your fear reaction. So first, the flesh reaction is fear, then finger pointing, then rational lying and spinning the situation, do a little spin doctoring there. So now we're going to see in verse 13 and 14, leadership's response, both Moshe's and Yahweh's. So in 13 and 14, Moses says, don't be afraid. In other words, shut down that fear reaction sort of process. He says, stand still and see the deliverance. And this is the thing that he says, okay, so be still, calm down, see the deliverance of Yah. And then, of course, the final step is move, following the instructions. That's verse 15. Yahweh says to Moses, okay, people are crying out. Why are they crying out? I already told them it's all good. By the way, once Yahweh, through leadership or whatever situation where you're given the answer that it will be okay, stop crying out. Move. See, now, because people would understand, well, he says be still, so he's just going to do it all. Well, no, he did the part they couldn't do. They couldn't put a fire pillar in front of the Mitzrayites to stop them, and they couldn't part the sea. So he did it for them. Wasn't that nice? He did that for them. But then he didn't pick them up and put them on the other side of the sea or float them across on air or something. They had to walk. He says, go forward. In other words, I've opened and cleared a path for you. So whatever you're going through, where your peace is disturbed, and you stand still in your emotions, and then he will open a path for you. Then you have to move forward. A path in your career, a path in a relationship, a path in your finances, whatever the path is, he'll open a path, but then you must do the doing. He'll only do what you can't. He is not going to do what you won't. If you're still going to be in won't, he's going to allow you to wallow, suffer, and have all of your rational lying to yourself, and blaming everybody, pointing the fingers, making every excuse in the book. Look, if you ever do personal development stuff, if you ever study that out, you'll hear at some point almost every teacher of these type of things tell you that every excuse you can come up with, I can tell you somebody who has the same excuse and did it anyway. Accomplished it anyway, succeeded anyway. Well, I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm a woman. I'm a man. I'm a kid. I'm an adult. I'm too fat. I'm too skinny. I'm not smart enough. I'm too smart. Whatever. I'm unhealthy. I'm handicapped. You come up with every possible, I'm this color. I'm that color. You can come up with any excuse, and there's somebody with the exact same conditions who, whatever it is you're struggling with, found a way to make it work. And so that's the flesh speaking, though. And that's stealing all your peace. If you're going to walk in the flesh, there is no peace. The flesh is either dealing with a negative emotion like fear, anxiety, panic, we talked about worry, all these things, or the flesh, the world, sort of intrinsic nature, is dealing with cravings that are unsatisfied, that insatiable nature of I want but I don't have. There's no peace in that. But I want more. I want it all. I want this. I want that. All the I wants that you don't get to have. Well, I don't like it, but I can't control it, and I want something to stop, and now I have no peace again. There's a lot of things in your life that you can't control. But if you have this craving, this need for it to stop or to change, but you can't control it, you lose your peace. There are, I'm going to quote it wrong, but there's a standard line that you see in almost all people are taught this when they're dealing with an addiction or something about, give me the strength to do the things I need to do and the peace to be able to trust that God will do the things I can't do, that kind of thing. That's what we're talking about. You need to trust that he will handle your Egyptian chariots behind you, walls around you, and sea in front of you problem. But he's only going to do the part he would do that you can't do. Because when you get to that place of being greatly afraid, now you've got some options to figure out what to do. Notice that they didn't get individual revelations. It came through leadership. Again, you need to find leadership that you can trust. Believe me, the more I talk about that, the more I'm being mocked, picked on, accused of being a cult leader and everything else. Bring it on. Look, this is between the individual, their creator, and his structure, and finding the Ephesians chapter 4 fivefold ministry guys. If I'm not that for you, that's fine. But understand, he works this through the leadership. The leadership had to tell them to calm down. I've had to do that a few times to some people in the congregation over the years. And some of them almost were ready to throw a punch at me. I said, and I wasn't even the reason they were mad. But I got in the middle of it and said, listen, you need to calm down. Nothing good's going to happen until you calm down. Now we have a new challenge, and I say this every time I get the chance. Because when you're in that place of no peace and you're not calm, you tend to grab a social media device and get yourself in even more trouble. It's like a cathartic thing. You can like release all your anger and pain publicly. But so you think it's anonymously, but you post it on your homepage. On your page. I mean, how is that anonymous? But you're posting, oh, but I didn't name the person. Everybody knows who you're talking about, who knows you. And knows what you're going through. Don't pick up your phone or whatever it is that you social media with when you're angry, fearful, your peace is disturbed. That's someplace to only post when you're at peace. Except for maybe to ask for help. When you say, I just had some things I'm going on, can people please, pray? Okay? Don't vent with social media. All right? You know what a vent is? Picture your dryer. It's where all the hot air comes out. Okay, the next time you go to vent, you're just blowing a bunch of hot air. Because you're all hot and angry about something and there's no peace in any of that. Okay, so that's why I wanted to break this thing down. So what we see is the world is pursuing you. The world is giving you challenges and you're afraid. The world's aware of what you're doing. By the way, so is the Father. He's watching what you're doing. And it's really, what is this? It all goes back to the Deuteronomy 8:2 test. Okay, let's actually go to Deuteronomy 8:2 just for a second, because we're going to go to Deuteronomy 7 next anyway. Deuteronomy 8:2. All right. And he says, and you shall remember, now this is, remember they're already gone through the 40-year journey, and now they're at the edge of the Jordan there to cross over into the land. He says, and you shall remember that Yahweh your Elohim led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you, to prove you, to know what is in your heart, whether you guard his commands or not. And he humbled you and he let you suffer. You don't have to even go further than that. He humbled you and let you suffer. You want to get mad? Blame him for letting you suffer. It doesn't say he caused you to suffer. He let you suffer. Why? Because you walked out of Egypt cocky, strutting, defiant, instead of humble and appreciative of the deliverance. Israel, and you were the same way. As soon as you came out of the churches, you probably got in all everybody's face and told them, well, Christmas was all pagan and all this other stuff, and started swinging your Torah around like it was a sword and whacking everybody and bludgeoning everybody. Finding all kinds of mocking memes to put on your Facebook page to mock all of the people doing that other stuff. Because, you were all strutty, you were all full of yourself. Well, you were full of something. I don't mean what you were thinking. I mean, you were full of all kinds of pride, ego, vanity, self-possessed, self-righteous, whatever. Now, that created stuff that smelled like what you think. Okay? Because it was very stinky performance by you. I mean, you just went and did a bunch of stuff that did not honor the Father or the Son. Because you were all defiantly, whatever. I mean, there are still groups out there. Some of them are mocking me, which is fine. But I don't understand this, okay? How do you see, and this is for all of you in this body, and anybody listening, whatever, how can you possibly see that this is honoring to the Father to mock those that are not honoring the Father? How does that make you better than any of them, whoever it is you think you're mocking? Because I know there are people out there on some meme-type pages for Hebrew roots-type people who, on it mocks, including us, which is fine. I guess I've arrived. But I mean, if you don't have a meme about you, I guess you haven't arrived, right? So we have memes about us now. But when you see people mocking people's walk or mocking their instruction, look, I think that the church, the mainstream church, has a lot to own up to for things that it's done in deceiving and misleading the people. But I'm not going to mock them. I'm not going to go make posts to mock them or the people in them. Yahweh has allowed that to exist, or it wouldn't exist. And almost all of the people I talk to came from there, which means that almost all the people I'll talk to in the future will probably come from there. And so they're there because they're there by default. In other words, he's allowed them without opening up their hearts, minds, or eyes. For the most part, I'm sure that very few people who he's kind of poked the bubble on has just decided, I'd rather be in Egypt. You know, didn't we tell you, leave us alone, we'd rather serve the Mitzrites. And so I'd like to believe that most of them, when they get their bubble burst, ask, seek, and knock till they find a way out. They find the answers they're looking for. But we need to not be defiantly journeying out of the world. He says that he let you suffer. This is to humble you. Look, people often quote verse 2 about that he's to prove you and test you to see what's in your heart. They forget that step 1 is the humbling. Okay? He led you through the wilderness first to humble you. He wasn't going to let you into the land until you've been humbled. So let's use the metaphor that we have to go with for we're looking the type and shadow. Let me just add Deuteronomy 8:2 to this, so I have it here. Okay? Let's just use the type and shadow here. The 40-year wilderness walk, the leaving Egypt through a wilderness or leaving the world through a wilderness journey, you need to be humbled. Just like they need to be humbled. And so through that, how do you get humbled? Through suffering. Because through suffering, by the way, what are you talking about? What kind of suffering? People beating on them? No, through lack. They were hungry. They were thirsty. They were lacking things, and they needed to look to him to provide them. So when you're struggling for jobs, when you're struggling for able to pay your bills, when you're struggling, then you know what? He's humbling you to get your attention, and then he's going to open up a path for you, and you need to walk through it. You know, he didn't just have them lay around like baby birds with their mouths open and pour the manna into their mouths. They had to go out and gather it up. I mean, that was, again, he provided something. You know, when he provided the quail, they weren't edible in the form they showed up in. They had to then take them, prepare them, and cook them. They had to do their part. But he provided a way to do what needed to be done. When the water came out of the rock, they still had to go over and drink from it. Okay, Yahweh wasn't sitting there with a big pitcher going, you know, like the water. Like, you know, when you picture Lydia, the water girl, Lilia, in the Ten Commandments movie, right? And she's walking around, you know, giving water to everybody. Yahweh didn't do that. They had to walk over where the water was and get their water. Okay, so he humbles us. You know, leaving Mitzrayim, having been delivered and redeemed, the journey to sanctification and acceptance can be scary. When you leave the world, because remember, he delivered you out of that lost-minded, confused, you know, when you were separated from him, you know, Ephesians chapter 2, and without Yahweh or Elohim in the world, and separate from the covenants and all that other stuff. When you left that and were delivered, the journey to sanctification, being set apart and sanctified, and then accepted by him, is not a smooth, straight path without temptations left and right, without pitfalls, without the ability to stumble. And here's the thing that you need to understand. In that picture, because some of you in your mind are trying to picture, well, isn't his path straight? Yes. You may make it crooked, but it's straight. Why would it have pitfalls on it? They're the ones you put there. If you would pull those stumbling blocks away, the path would be smooth. You've manifested those things in your way. He says, do not let your heart be troubled, neither be afraid. In John 14, Yeshua says this. So you let your heart be troubled. You perceive, look, you saw the sea and said, I can't get through that. You saw the mountains, no going through that. You see the Egyptians, they're coming down on me. But then you can be still and see the deliverance. So when you see these things on your path, essentially, think of them almost as illusions, because if you trusted that he would handle them or show you how to handle them, they wouldn't appear as a pit or a stumbling block. You would just get up to there and trust that it would be handled. You wouldn't have any of those fears. All right? So leaving Mitzrayim, being delivered and redeemed, right? Because you know that you were delivered and you were redeemed. Yeshua's blood redeems us. The journey to sanctification and acceptance can be scary, but to get there, ultimately, we must develop a fullness of emunah. Okay? When we have that belief, that faith, that trust, that everything is under Yahweh's control, that he causes or allows everything for his purpose, then we will be able to get there. So if you journeyed with Israel and you already had this full emunah, you would look there and go, oh, this is going to be cool. There's a sea in front of us, mountains left and right, and Egyptians behind us. I can't wait to see what happens. That's what a person with emunah would say, because they would know he allowed or caused the situation. And you just be like getting the popcorn out. This is going to be great, man. You're going to have a seat, sit down, and just... Why don't you react to the things in your life that way? Because you're having a fear reaction. You're having this flesh reaction. The flesh reaction of fear, finger pointing, rational, lying, spinning. But if you would have the emunah reaction, you'd get excited. Man, I'm about to drown in debt, no job, something really incredible is about to happen. And get excited. Ah, you're all panicky. How can you get excited? You're like, ah. Well, what was the first thing? Be still. No, I'm sorry. What was the first thing? Find a leader who can tell you to be still. Moses happened to already be standing there and saw them panicking. So go call your leader up and say, I'm facing the water, the walls of the mountains and the Egyptians. I need someone to encourage me to be still. Tell me it's going to be okay. And that I can get excited of what Yahweh's going to do. Because almost all of you probably have had, I would guess, at least several moments where you didn't see a way out and a way out was provided. So you already have had these experiences. So if you're in one, why do you act like you've never been in one? And you survived all of those. And here you are, and now you find yourself in another one. All right, so you're in another one. Think of it as an exercise program for your emunah. It's just emunah, we'll call it the emunah workout. He's going to allow you to go into these situations to strengthen and build and test your emunah. And every time you get through one, you should come out of it with stronger emunah. More peace, less fear. He says, I don't give it the way the world gives. This is the way he gives it, through this process. Are we making sense? Okay? All right, let's go to Deuteronomy 7. So we'll go back one chapter. We begin in verse 17. Again, I'm going to read this whole little segment that I want to read of 6 or 7 verses, and then we're going to break it down. Beginning in verse 17. When you say in your heart, these nations are greater than I am unable to drive them out. Do not be afraid of them. Remember well what Yahweh your Elohim did to Pharaoh and to all Mitzrayim. The great trials which your eyes saw, and the signs and wonders, the strong hand and the outstretched arm by which Yahweh, your Elohim, brought you out. Yahweh, your Elohim, does so to all the peoples of whom you are afraid. And Yahweh, your Elohim, also sends the hornet among them until those who are left, who hide themselves from you, are destroyed. Do not be afraid of them, for Yahweh your Elohim, the great and awesome El, is in your midst. And Yahweh your Elohim shall drive out those nations before you, little by little. You are not allowed to destroy them at once, lest the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. But Yahweh your Elohim shall deliver them over to you and destroy them with a great destruction until they are consumed. Okay, because I just saw something I didn't see when I first made the notes. And I'll explain to you when we get there. All right, so this is talking about, beginning it says, when you are seeing nations greater. So we're talking about this again as a metaphor from what Israel faced as a nation to what you deal with as an individual. We're kind of finding those relational things there. So what do we have first? So when faced with an intimidating, overwhelming situation, isn't that essentially what they were facing? Nations greater than I. You know, when you face nations greater and they're going to make you afraid, and you're unable to drive them out, at least in your own strength, your own power. So you're facing an intimidating, overwhelming situation. Isn't that what was happening? Joshua and Caleb went to spy the land. They said, yeah, there's giants and big walls and a lot of people, but so what? Everybody else was what? Intimidated and overwhelmed. So step 1.1, when faced with an intimidating, overwhelming situation, do not be afraid. That's what he says right there. He says, and these things are happening. Verse 18, he says, do not be afraid of them. Don't be intimidated. Don't be overwhelmed. I have to tell you, and I'm not picking on anybody, because it could have been thousands of people who did not do this, but these are the few that did, which is they picked up the phone and called me, and they said almost those words, Rabbi, I'm overwhelmed, I'm afraid, I'm intimidated. They didn't, they described a situation that was intimidating them and overwhelming them. They felt imposed and pressured, because what is intimidation? It's somebody feeling like something outside of them is forcing and pushing them to do or not do something. Like there's a threat there. You better do, or you better stop doing, or, This happens when you become Torah observant from family members, bosses, etc. Oh, you better just show up to work on Saturday. I'm just going to fire you. Oh, you better let me put that Christmas tree in the house, or I'm going to leave you. Intimidating, overwhelming. Overwhelming meaning I don't feel like I have the capacity to handle. Overwhelming doesn't mean necessarily large numbers. It may just mean I do not feel I have the capacity to handle it. It's more than overwhelm, more than my system or more than the thing can handle, above and beyond what the thing that's being talked about can manage. And so here he says, look, when you're faced with that, do not be afraid. This is part of how the king of this world wants to steal your peace. He's going to try to overwhelm you, try to intimidate you. But don't be afraid. So how do I do that, Rabbi? By remembering what Yahweh's already done in your life. He says, remember what Yahweh did to Pharaoh, to all Mitzrayim? Remember all the great things, miracles, signs, and wonders he's done in your life? When he was taking you out of the world and out of the fleshly existence that you were in before? Don't forget the things that have already happened that are evidence. Look, you're not here because you made a very brilliant, well thought out, intellectual decision in your, global, like a global religious studies, like a world religious studies. You didn't just sit there and go, let me examine all the religions and pick the one that intellectually made the most sense and I could prove it. That's not why you're here. You're here because of what? Remembering what Yahweh did in your life, with the Pharaohs in your life, with the Mitzrayim in your life, and the signs and the wonders and the strong hand with which he handled things in your life. That's why you're here. You didn't do a comparative, that's the word I was looking for, a comparative religion study. They offer those courses like in a lot of very nice liberal arts colleges, right? Comparative religion. So it's not like you did a comparison. It's not like when you're shopping for something and you go look for, best, whatever it is you're looking for, best, let's say I'm looking for a new minivan. What's the top new minivan? Is it the Odyssey? Is it the Sienna? Is it another company? Whatever. What's the best one? So it's not like you did some sort of study like that. What's the best religion? What's the right one that way? No, you were hand-picked, bubble-popped, peace-disturbed, and then you asked, you sought, right? You asked, seek, knock, etc. Miracles happened. Interventions happened. Some of you were not looking for this at all. Some of you had already told him, forget it. If you don't give me an answer now, I'm just done with you. Leave me alone, right? Okay? And then he says, don't forget I did all that. I did all that so that you would remember next time something popped up, look what I've already done. Why would you be afraid that I couldn't do more? That's why we sit here going, okay, the one who created everything like the earth we stand on and the sun and the moon and the stars and set the wind blowing and the oceans and all, he can't handle my job problem, my finance problem, my relationship problem, my marriage problem, whatever it is. This is too big for him. He destroyed the biggest nation in the world at the time, Egypt, with incredible signs and wonders, took a whole nation out of that nation, and I'm worried that he can't handle my little problem. So you have both your personal experience of the signs and wonders, and then the account of them in the book of all the things you've seen happen. And so here we go. So he says, when faced with intimidating and overwhelming situation, don't be afraid. Remember well what Yahweh your Elohim did to Pharaoh and all Mitzrayim. Remember the great signs which your eyes saw, the signs and the wonders, the strong hand and the outstretched arm, by which your Elohim, Yahweh your Elohim brought you out. Okay? Now he says again, next step, Yahweh your Elohim does so to all the situations. That's one of the things he wants you to understand, that he does this to all the situations that you may find yourself in. This is the important thing. But you end up being afraid. He says, look, he's going to do this to all of the situations that you find yourself in. He says, don't try or expect to win every battle all at once. He says, in the verse, he says, look, do not try to drive out all at once. He says, little by little, though, because you're not allowed to destroy them all at once, lest the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. So don't try to destroy everything all at once, because it only opens you up to other challenges. So here they're thinking, oh, the people are the problem. Well, we get rid of the people out of the problem, and then you have these other problems. So just be careful if you try to get rid of all your problems all at once, you might find yourself with other problems. He says, just patiently go through it one by one, and it'll take care of itself. Okay? And then he says that ultimately it is Yahweh who does the fighting for you to win the battles. All right? You still have to do your part. And part of your part is to stand still and let him do his part. That's hard because you're in panic mode. And in panic mode, you want to do something. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Nothing. Stand still until he tells you what to do. Until he opens the path, shows you what to do. Let him part the sea first so you know what to do. The sea hasn't parted yet. Well, then calm down. Or seek leadership who may tell you the things that you can be doing while you're waiting for the sea. Instead of just panicking, they probably needed to make camp, because remember, the wind blew all night and they were sitting there, and they needed to just calm down, take care of whatever physical needs were going on, and wait for Yahweh to handle it. Now, the one verse that I kind of put a note to myself on was verse 20. And Yahweh your Elohim sends the hornet among them until those who are left, who hide themselves from you, are destroyed. Okay, so this is interesting. Just realize that those that are causing the problem, he's dealing with it. He may send them something that will be that irritant, that buzzing, that hornet, that's going to eventually drive them out of your life, if that's the problem. So if you have that person in your life or situation in your life, don't worry, he will create the situation that will eventually take that out of your life. It may take a little while, but he's saying, look, eventually those that are hiding themselves from you, in other words, so that you can't get rid of them, you can't chase them out, they will be chased out. They'll be destroyed, whatever it is. It won't be a problem anymore. Hopefully that makes some sense for everybody as we're going through this. Okay. You want to have peace? You're going to have to deal with your flesh, which is going to be the default reaction. You have to learn to calm down and watch what he does. And you're going to have to remind yourself. Maybe you need to write down all of the amazing things that you are appreciative that he's done in your life. Keep it on something that when you have a situation where the flesh rears up, you grab that card and go, hold on. On the top of it, it should say, be calm, be still, read. And then read what's on there. Remind yourself what he did in your life, where you were before, where you would be if he hadn't intervened in your life, where you would likely be, what your situation would be, and how you couldn't have ever imagined back then that you could be where you are now from the positive side. Where would your life have been had he not done those things then? Write that down. Just short little one-line bullet points just to remind yourself. You don't need the whole story. You know the whole story. Just write down the such and such situation or whatever it was, and you'll remember all of that stuff. Let's say you were an alcoholic. Just say, just write down, freed me from alcohol, if that's what it was. Let's say you had whatever problem was, just write it down. He delivered you, you know that, but you forget. In other words, it drifts from being in front of your eyes, so to speak. That's why he tells you to put him as frontlets and before your eyes. And that's why scripturally over and over again he tells Israel, do not forget you were slaves in Egypt. Not just to remember what it was like to be a slave, but to remember everything he did to bring them out. All those miracles. Let's go to chapter 18. We'll stay in Deuteronomy. Chapter 18. Beginning in verse 13, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to read this through and then we'll break it down a little bit. This one's going to be very powerful. Okay, we're going to begin in verse 13, chapter 18, Deuteronomy. Be perfect before Yahweh your Elohim. All right, everybody quit. We can't do it. Forget it. The context here is when you are confronted with, that you are to have, integrity, obviously. Okay, be perfect means integrity. Let me just read the whole thing through. Be perfect before Yahweh your Elohim, for these nations whom you are possessing do listen to those using magic and to diviners. But as for you, Yahweh your Elohim has not appointed such for you. Yahweh your Elohim shall raise up for you a prophet, like me, from your midst, from your brothers. Listen to him. According to all you asked of Yahweh your Elohim at Horeb in the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of Yahweh my Elohim, nor let me see the great fire any more lest I die. And Yahweh said to me, what they have spoken is good. And Yahweh said to me, what they have spoken is good. I shall raise up for them a prophet like you out of the midst of their brothers, and I shall put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And it shall be, the man who does not listen to my words, which he speaks in my name, I shall require it of him. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other mighty ones, even that prophet shall die. And when you say in your heart, how do we know the word of Yahweh, the word which Yahweh had not spoken? He says, when the prophet speaks in the name of Yahweh and the word is not or comes not, that is the word which Yahweh has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. Do not be afraid of him. So this has to do with fear now again. So let's look at the context here. So verse 13, be perfect. The context here is when you are confronted with prophets. Okay, he's saying have integrity before Yahweh when dealing with leadership. It says don't just listen to those who are following magic and diviners and all these false prophets. So this be perfect has to do with leadership. How you choose and who you choose to submit to in terms of leadership. Hopefully you can see that. Because he says, be perfect before Yahweh, he goes right into, because all these nations, they're doing all of these things. So here the context is a very specific relational behavioral thing. Then he says in verse 15, Yahweh will raise up prophets for his covenanted people. Yahweh raises up those prophets. Now, we need to pause here just for a second to make sure we have a proper definition of prophet, not the ones that have business cards coming from mainstream and have the name prophet in front of their name. Prophet is not a hierarchical title in terms of some sort of business structure, okay? That's what people turn Ephesians 4, the fivefold ministry, into. Well, first there's apostles, and then there's prophets, and then as if this is a vertical alignment of some sort. Okay, they're just different roles. So what does a prophet do? A prophet speaks the word of Yahweh with authority. You see this with Moshe, and then we see it with the 70. They get the same spirit that was on Moshe cast onto them, so they have it as well, that they're prophesying. This is the law of first mention. This is the first place you see it mentioned, that they were prophesying. What were they doing? They were saying like Moses was. They were teaching Yahweh's words. But here's a really important thing, that Yahweh raises these prophets up, and this is the thing that I missed when I was putting this together until just now. The reason he does this is because the people asked for it. Now let's understand, we normally hear people read starting in verse 18. Isn't that true? But they use that to point to Yeshua. Oh, no. It's absolutely about Yeshua, but you're missing 90% of the point. These people who said, at Sinai, we don't want to hear directly from you. We don't want to hear directly from you. He says, these prophets are going to be those who are going to speak the words because you asked me to speak through a prophet. You told me you didn't want to hear directly. He says, because he puts it right there, he says, Yahweh shall raise up you a prophet like me in the midst of you from your brothers to listen to him. According to, just as you asked Yahweh in Horeb on the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of Yahweh Elohim, nor let me see the great fire anymore, lest I die. So Yahweh said, that's fine. When it says, Yahweh said, what you've spoken is good, he didn't say it's the right thing. He says, okay, I agree. Okay, that's good, that's fine. He said, okay, that's fine. You ever have somebody say something to you, and then you say to them, and then one of you goes, all right, that's fine. In other words, we can do that. And nobody said, it didn't say, oh, that's great, that's a great idea. No, I said, okay, that's good, that's fine. That'll work. So I believe that Yahweh was simply saying, okay, I can work with that. You don't want to hear from me directly, we can do this, okay? So, let's be clear on this process here. So it says, Yahweh raises up the prophets for his covenanted people. These prophets shall be like Moshe. And that's where the verse 16 thing comes in. So like Moshe, okay, what was Moshe doing? He was the middleman to help them to understand Yahweh's, what he wanted the people to know. To give the word and the instruction of Yahweh in a way that people could understand it. To be that person, to be the spokesperson of the Torah, of the word. All right, so these prophets will be like Moshe. They are to be listened to. Now he says, look, and he shall speak to them everything I command. It shall be the man who does not listen to my words. That word there is a form of the word Shema. So he's expecting them to hear and do Yahweh's words, which that prophet speaks. Okay, now bear in mind, the people are obviously having the question, well, how do we know? And that's why they ask later, how do we know this person is speaking your words? So he says here that they are to be listened to. The prophets will come out of the midst of his covenanted people. Why? I find this exhausting. Why do you still go into the mainstream and other places to get what you think is prophecy? I know you're doing it because some of you still forward me links to videos of people doing it. He says here that I shall raise up for you a prophet like you out of the midst of their brothers. He says in verse 15, Yahweh Elohim shall raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers. The midst of who? The covenanted people. He's not taking them out of the world or out of a different religious system or out of the mainstream of uncovenanted Christianity. And don't get all mad at me. If you don't understand what covenant is, don't tell me they're new covenant. I don't know what covenant, but and I'm not blaming them. The system did this to them. The covenant is Exodus 19. I speak, you do, period. That's the covenant. And so why are you listening to those who have done away with that covenant as if they're prophesying and telling you important things about what's coming? Oh, but they might be right. He never says that they're always going to be wrong. Otherwise, why would anybody listen to anybody if they're always wrong? But he said, the prophets you're supposed to be listening to, I'm going to raise them up from amongst the covenanted people, your brothers and sisters, right? So from your brothers, Oh, by the way, we got a lot of female prophets out there. He said, I'm going to take one from among your brothers. Just saying. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to the ladies. I'm just going with what he says here. I haven't got enough people mad at me today. I'm trying to up my hater points. More haters, more haters. Okay. I'm just trying to give more fuel to the 3 people that already said thumbs down to today's video. They do that before the service even starts. It's crazy. We'll get 3 thumbs down before 1:15, between 1 o'clock and 1:15. It's like people log on, thumbs down, and they leave. Like, what are you mad? Because we weren't teaching yet? What happened? All right. He said, so the prophets will come out of the midst of his covenanted people. The prophets will have Yah's words in their mouths, and they shall speak what Yah commands. So you want someone who's doing what I'm doing today, reading Yah's word, his commands, and telling you how you can take that and do the covenant. In other words, Shema, hear and do his things, the way he set them in motion, the way he decided they should look, etc., in your life. So you're going to be looking for prophets who do these things. And he says, the man who does not listen to my words, which I speak, the man who does not listen to my words, which he speaks in my name, I shall require it of him. Verse 19, right? And it shall be the man who does not listen to my words, which he speaks in my name, I shall require it of him. You know, in Deuteronomy 17, if in my book, I just turned to the other page, so that was on the right hand, not going to the left hand. In Deuteronomy 17, in verse 8, and when any matter arises which is too hard for you to judge, between blood and blood, plea and plea, stroke and stroke, matters of strife within your gates, then you shall rise up and go to the place which Yahweh your Elohim chooses, and shall come to the priest, the Levites, to the judge who is in those days, and shall inquire, and they shall declare to you the word of right ruling, and you shall do according to the word they declare, which they declare to you from that place which Yahweh chooses. And you shall guard to do according to all that they instruct you. Do according to the Torah in which they teach you, according to the right ruling which they say to you. You do not turn to the right and to the left from the word which they declare to you. And the man who acts arrogantly so as to not listen to the priest who stands to serve there before Yahweh your Elohim, or to the judge, that man shall die. So you shall purge the evil from Israel, and let all the people hear and fear, and no longer do arrogantly. Look, if we are going to do this, let's stop goofing off. Let's stop calling things cults and things that whatever you want to do. This is his word on how the structure is supposed to work. There is supposed to be somebody, a group of somebodies, that you can go to when you have these issues, and when you do, you are required to follow their instruction. Wow, that sounds really dangerous, Rabbi, because then these guys could really take advantage. You are so right, which is why you have to find the right group of people and the right person to follow. What you're looking for then is Deuteronomy. He explains what happened in Deuteronomy 17 in Deuteronomy 18. You're looking for the prophet. I'm not saying the prophet. You're looking for a prophet, a person whose role it is to speak the word with authority. Not simply a teacher who's going to tell you, how to do your ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s of Torah, but the prophet, the one who's going to declare to you the right ruling with authority. You need the teacher. Remember, the teacher is one of the 5. But he's saying, but you need for these type of things, the prophet, the judge, the priest, the one with the authority. Oh, but we don't have a priesthood anymore. Yes, we do. It's a Melchizedekian priesthood. Moses, I believe, was of the order of Melchizedek. Aaron was the first of the order of Levi. And so you have both priesthoods running at the same time in this time period. And so prior to this time period, you had only the Melchizedekian, because you had to go back to Abram and Melchizedek. All right? The priest of the Most High. And now Yeshua, we know, is high priest of the Melchizedek order. And he discipled his disciples to be Melchizedek, whatever it is, Melchizedekian or whatever, priests of the order of Melchizedek, or Melchizedek, how you want to pronounce it, Melchizedek. That's the training for them. That's just like, notice that how many did Yeshua have? He had the 70. Well, guess what? Moses had how many? 70. You know how many were in the Sanhedrin? 70. Actually 71, because you had the Nasi. Moses was not counted as part of the 70. He was additional to that, right? So you have to understand these things. So he's telling us in chapter 18 that the prophets are going to come out of the midst of this covenanted people, that the prophet will have Yah's word in the mouth, and they will speak what Yah commands. And the man who does not listen to my words, which he speaks in my authority, I will require it from him. And when the prophet speaks in the name of Yahweh and the word is not or comes not, that is the word Yahweh did not speak. That prophet has spoken presumptuously. Do not be afraid of him. Do not give him any of the awe and respect. That's what that fear is there. Do not awe and reverence and respect in that fearful manner that false prophet. I know that I get in trouble for this every time, and I'm not naming names. You know teachers out there, there's plenty of them, who have said things that have not come. But you still awe and reverence and whatever them. Why? Oh, you're just trying to eliminate ministries so that this has nothing to do with me. Read the word, stop arguing for what you want. But I like that teacher and this and that, and they were important in my journey. I get all that. He says, if they say, it says, when the prophet speaks in the authority of Yahweh and it doesn't happen, that is not coming from Yahweh, period, end of story. All the blood mooners, all of the doomsayers with the last meteor, rock, whatever thing that didn't kill everybody, all those things that did not happen, that they were using to convince you. I know they all put little Diet Cokes at the end of everything. If you know what I'm talking about, go listen to the little In Focus on the spiritual Diet Coke. Okay? It's like all of you going to McDonald's and ordering the double cheeseburger and a Diet Coke, like somehow that's going to eliminate all your calories. Okay, putting a small disclaimer at the end saying, not that I'm naming dates, after you just spent 2 hours naming dates and convincing everybody that Yeshua will be here next September, that doesn't do anything any more than the Diet Coke does. Okay? But you guys want to try to, say, oh, but he said the disclaimer. Nobody's listening to the disclaimer. He threw that on there just because you knew he had to, according to all this. But yet he spent the entire time selling books, CDs, DVDs, and everything else to try to convince you that the end is now, Yeshua is coming, here are the signs in the heavens, there we go. But you still listen and follow these people. And then the person that is anointed and appointed and speaking the word of Yahweh, you don't listen to half the time or more. Because you don't want to believe there's supposed to be structure and authority. You don't want to do all of this. Well, we're not there, Rabbi, and we don't really have a proper blah, 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 blah. Make all the, now you're back to the lying, rational lying, spinning to yourself, pointing the fingers, making excuses, and blah, blah, blah. And don't just give me the excuse, well, I haven't found this yet. Are you even looking for it? Because I've had people say, well, I haven't found that yet, but they're not looking either. If you're here, I'm guessing that a bunch of you think that this may be one of those places. And I try to take that very seriously and understand that if this is, I try to make sure that I'm not breaking anything in this. I'm trying to make sure you only hear his word from my mouth with his authority, knowing full well that if you listen, like it says to do here, that it's not only going to be required of you, but if I'm wrong, it's going to be double required of me. It nowhere says that if you do the best you can and it turns out it's wrong, that it's required of you. It's going to be double required of me. Your requirement was to do the best you can to find a prophet. So I know we don't really like to bandy about those titles very much, but I think we've overinflated that a prophet only means Jeremiah, Isaiah, Elijah, whatever. Speaking the word of Yah with authority is walking in that role. And what I mean with authority, I don't mean like with just, a lot of bravado and a lot of, conviction. I mean, with authority, meaning people are listening. You have a bully pulpit, so to speak, and people are listening, and they're following, and your instructions are being walked. And if your instructions are being walked, it better not be yours, it better be his. And that should be a warning to all those guys out there that all have YouTube channels and everything else who think they're so smart and they're untrained, unstudied. No, I'm sure they're very trained and very studied in the wrong things. They've not sat under and made sure to clear out all of the denominational stuff. And that's really the problem. Which is really funny because there are even people out there claiming that this is just a splinter of, Worldwide Church of God, which I came out of many, many years ago. I was only in for a few minutes. Look, if you actually knew their doctrinal positions and knew how they ran things, you would not think this looks like them. We do use the same book, and they taught to keep Torah, and so do I. And so that's not a negative. But how I teach it, how I talk about how you to apply it, not even close. But unless you were there, you don't know. But yet, people hear things and say, well, it's just one of those things. Well, you don't know anything about that. Oh, yes, I do. I read an article about Mr. Armstrong and that whole church, and so I know everything. It's like the person who claims they know anything about Talmud because they read an article that somebody posted something about one little segment of it somewhere. Oh, I know the Talmud. Really? It's the Babylonian one is 73 volumes. Did you read that? 73 volumes. Each one, we're talking, big, thick books. I'm not saying you should read this thing. I'm just making a point. The point is, please be careful you claim something and you really have no real knowledge of it. You don't have knowledge of something until you what? You have a relationship with it. Right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was that they would have a relationship with good and evil. And until they ate of it, they only knew that it was scary and it was something they shouldn't touch. And they didn't really understand much about it. And they didn't need to. They needed to trust Yah that they didn't need to understand more than that. But then they ate of it and then they understood. And that was the problem, right? Look, I just don't know how much stronger to be about this thing scares you, and I know that. And you're dealing with fear, and that's why you don't have peace, because after all, structure has been done poorly all the way to the beginning. Go to Genesis. We don't see structure being done very well. Look, even Yeshua's group that was so perfectly set up, how long did that last before it turned into something called the Catholic Church? Okay, the structure was perfect when he left and stayed that way for a little while. And then man and the world and everything else, mankind kind of got in there and messed up the whole deal. And those that were not wanting to go along with that were martyred and chased out and everything else. So I get it. But if you want peace, okay, he's saying this will help to bring you peace. It'll help so you are not afraid. If you had confidence in your leadership, you would have a whole lot more peace and a whole lot less fear. Can we agree to that? Well, how do we know we can trust you? Everybody says all these nasty things about you. They said nasty things about Yeshua. They said nasty things about Moses. They said nasty things about Paul. I'm not claiming to be on their level. I'm just saying, what leader did they ever not say nasty things about? Is there a leader you can think of that everybody just loved? I don't know of anyone. They all point the finger and accuse every leader there was. Okay? So let's just keep that in mind. Wow, I almost went over time here. Let's go ahead and pray. We'll finish with this. Father, we come before you, and we're just so blessed to have your word, written form for us to digest on a regular basis, easily accessible. And Father, we know that not every generation has had this the way we do. And so, Father, we really appreciate and are blessed by the access to you and to your word. Father, help us to embrace the things that you are showing us in the word so that we can truly have the peace that Yeshua was talking about, the peace that he was giving to us, so that our heart would not stumble and we would not be afraid. Father, the world is providing us with plenty of intimidating and overwhelming situations, and we need to just remember that you are the same one who did all of these great signs and wonders in the book as well as in our lives. And so, Father, we come to you now very humbled, continuing to become more humble, and trusting as we exercise in a good way, like to get it stronger, as we exercise our emunah and strengthen it, to trust and believe that all that is going on is either caused or allowed by you for your purposes. So, Father, we want to thank you now and ask you to continue to have patience with us as we change and grow and transform into Yeshua's image, as we come to you now in the authority of Yeshua, and it's in his name we pray. Amen. Amen. Amen.